Welcome to FBI Retired Case File Review Live. I'm Jerry Williams, and I'm on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does with my books, my blog, and my podcast interviews with retired agents. I want to introduce my two guests here. I have retired agent Scott Duffey. Scott served in the FBI for 22 years. For the majority of his career, he was assigned to the Wilmington Resident Agency out of the Baltimore Division, where he worked violent crime matters and was later promoted to a supervisory special agent. Scott has traveled the United States and parts of the world as an adjunct instructor for the FBI in the field of interview and interrogation. Scott Duffey served as the coordinator of the FBI's Delaware Violent Crimes Task Force from 1999 to 2011. Prior to joining the Bureau, he was a Lower Marion Township police officer with a BA in Classical Languages and a master's degree in Administration of Justice. Scott Duffey currently serves as the Associate Director of the Criminal Justice Institute for Wilmington University and is an adjunct instructor in the Criminal Justice Program. Welcome, Scott. And my next guest is retired agent Terrance Mortimer, who served in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives for 28 years. As a special agent with ATF, he investigated violent crime, armed drug traffickers, bombers, arsonists, killers in the Baltimore-Washington metropolitan area. He served 3 years as the training manager and lead instructor for interviewing and interrogation training at the ATF National Academy in Brunswick, Georgia. He was also a member of the ATF Peer Response Team, deployed to mitigate critical incident trauma and encourage resilience from law enforcement officers, first responders, and their families. Prior to becoming an ATF agent, he graduated from the Washington Bible College with a BA in Theology and Biblical Studies and served as a police officer in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Currently, Terry is a co-founder and principal of the Salem Training Consultancy, LLC. Welcome, Terry. So I'm going to do this like I do my podcast, which is to start everybody off and then shut up, because that's the way we do interviewing in the FBI and ATF. We get our subject started talking, and then we get out of the way. So this case, if you've already had a chance to listen to episode 179, started, what year was that?
It started in November 04.
Okay, and originally this was not a murder, an unsolved murder case that you were looking at. Why don't we start the case review? Scott, why don't you tell us how you became involved in the case, and then Terry can let us know how he became involved.
Well, good. Is it afternoon? Good morning?
I think it's afternoon.
Beautiful day anyways. So Terry and I think as this case became a case for Terry on his side of the house in the ATF, my side as the FBI, Terry being out of Baltimore, me being out of Wilmington, there was the story of, hey, there's a guy getting out of jail. He was a white supremacist. And the ATF locked him up about 10 years earlier. And so there's rumblings that he's threatening one of the police agents, a TFO, we call him, task force officer, who was a Wilmington police detective working for the ATF, who put him there. And that there were these rumblings that wanted him dead. There was a threat against his life. So the FBI, one of the things we do is we investigate threats against federal officers. And this was a federal officer. So I get the case, and it's like, okay, let's take a look. Like anything else, you read what you have, you assess, you get some background information, and then you figure out what's your first step. Where are we going to go? And then I'm introduced to Terry Mortimer from the ATF, because this is a threat against an ATF TFO. And And so Terry and I met. I'm not sure exactly where we met. I want to say it was probably either the ATF office or the U.S. Attorney's office. Does that sound right? No.
No.
This is the fun part about having two different case agents from a case long ago. Some things I remember, some things I don't.
We met on the street in Wilmington. You came down and met me.
Random?
No, I called you. I said, Scott, you don't know me. I'm Terrance Mortimer. I'm assigned to the case, and we had never met before. So we met on the street. And that's where it started. It really just started talking outside of the FBI office.
Okay. Was there a coffee vendor or something? Was I panhandling? And the streets of Wilmington, you know, where our office is and where it's central located of all the banking and the federal agencies and whatnot. It's a pretty nice section of Wilmington, and you know, then of course surrounding Wilmington, just like any other major cities, you have your issues, but beautiful part of the city. And so that's so when we met, so began our venture. I will say it is a venture.
Let me ask a question. How early into the investigation did you realize that you have a lot in common? And you know what I'm talking about, so why don't we talk a little bit about that too?
Okay, let's get it out nice and early.
So for me, and I'll just say how it came out. But so one morning I was waking up in November '04, and I was coming out of sleep, and the Lord spoke to me clearly. And he said to me, he said, I have a very important assignment for you, and you better take it seriously. I didn't know what he meant.
Remember, this is a person who went to Bible college and got a major in theology. So it's deep for you.
It is. And, you know, I didn't know what he meant, but the Lord had used me in not investigations so much, but in extra work situations where threats were involved, threat against a pastor or whatever. I was involved in mitigating those threats. And so I didn't know it was that kind of assignment from the Lord. I had no idea what he meant. And so I kind of, but he said, and you better take it seriously, very sternly. I'm like, this is serious. Like, I don't know what's going on, but so the next day or the day after, my boss comes to me. I was working in the intelligence group. He said, hey, the SAC and the ASAC want to talk to you. I'm like, well, am I in trouble? What's going on? He wouldn't tell me what's going on. And he said, no, they'll explain it all to you. I said, okay. So the three of us went back to the agent in charge's office, and he said, I have a very important assignment for you. I'm like, I heard that somewhere before. And I'm like, okay. And he laid it out, and he said, look, this is serious. I need you to, you're going to be a team with an FBI agent. I need you to get to the bottom of this. And there's some politics involved. I won't say the name, but there's some political person who was very interested in what happened. I guess it got to their level. And he said, I need you to take care of this. I said, okay. So that's kind of the background to, he said, don't pass, this is the only thing you're going to do until you get it solved. And you're going to meet up with the FBI agent. I didn't know who it was. And that's leads us to, me and Scott meeting Wilmington.
Okay. And again, there's a theme to this because, Scott, if you could explain to everyone what you initially thought your avocation was going to be.
Yeah, so I started in the Catholic seminary, St. Charles Seminary in Lower Merion. And I knew I wanted to be a police officer early in my life. I say 5, but I think it was earlier. And I walked up to, probably senior in high school, and I walked up to the Connecticut State Police lobby. I said, this is where I want to start. And I remember this trooper looking from above this very tall desk, looking down at me and saying, son, you're too small, too skinny, wouldn't survive. Why don't you go do something different, see if you grow up a little bit, and then come back. So, I, for 16, 17-year-old, shattered. It's like, this is my career, it's my life. So I took a test in school. And I remember a lot of law enforcement questions. And then after the test came back, it was like a 300-question test. The principal said, he goes, Scott, what do you think it's this is taking you? So there was a lot of law enforcement questions. I think I got them right, so probably back into the law enforcement world. Nope. God's calling you. What are you talking about? Seminary. Believe it or not, it said, you're destined for the ministry. Okay, that's where I'm going. So I packed my bags from Connecticut and drove to Doylestown, Pennsylvania, where it all started. And I became a Polish monk. Doylestown, the Shrine of Częstochowa. And there was my journey. And the good Lord, he was calling me, but I started to grow up a little bit.
Yeah. And the reason I wanted them to explain their background, you'll get it as we talk about this case, because I don't know if there was anybody else who would continue investigating a case like this, because they really had nothing to begin with, and it had to be something like a calling that had them continue. So I'm going to fast forward, because we've got a lot to talk about, and we've only got an hour. So I'm going to fast forward to say that after looking into the threat against a federal officer, there wasn't anything there. And so they decided that they weren't going to pursue that investigation. But while investigating it, they interviewed Tom Guyveson, his girlfriend, and asked that question that we like to ask after we've completed everything that we know in an interview, which is there anything else you'd like to tell me, or is there anything that I forgot to ask you? So continue the story from that point.
Yeah, so I think to your point, Jerry, so we were at a loss. We had nothing. We couldn't really establish a threat. Scott and I are both talking a lot like, well, we go back to our bosses and say, look, there's nothing here. We can't charge anybody for anything. We just call it a day kind of thing. We both felt like, and Scott and I, back to your earlier question, we both realized early on, hey, we had a mission. This wasn't just a case. There's something here we have to get down to the bottom of. We don't know what it is, but there's something that's waiting for us. So we had no threat case, but we felt like, given the allegation from the defendant's ex-girlfriend, she had mentioned about this homicide. And it was a racially motivated homicide. It was a homicide that he did for a spiderweb tattoo. And so she told us all the details, but we had nothing objective to really pin that down. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But so that's where it kind of started, and it was a very a well-known rumor from the defendant's classmates in high school and stuff. So we interviewed them, and it was always just a rumor.
And again, the rumor was that Tom Guyveson and what was the name of his
Craig Peterson
had gone to their senior prom, their high school prom, sporting fresh tattoos. And they said that they got these tattoos because they had killed a black man. And this was their reward. This is what the girlfriend is telling them.
And yes, and they did it as part of a skinhead, to get initiated into a skinhead gang with the tattoos. That was their goal.
And so the threat case is gone. You're not going to pursue that. But the two of you, again, because of their calling, felt that this other thing, this rumor, needed to be pursued. But you don't know anything. You don't know when it happened, where it happened, who the victim was, nothing. So take us from that point.
Yeah, we absolutely had nothing. And so thereby, two federal agents from two different agencies, Terry traveling up from his Baltimore office, this should have been killed within the first time that we go to our bosses and say, there's no threat case. Thank you very much. Shake hands, and let's get on to other things. But it absolutely, there was something inside. And I always say something. I know it was the Lord. I know it was God. But when you're going through this and you're experiencing it for really the first time, where it's like, I don't feel like I can stop. Terry and I, we would get together, get in the car, if we're going to go do an interview or whatever, and Terry's like, can we say a prayer? Sure, let's say a prayer, Terry. And
This is not what normally happens
No.
during an FBI investigation.
I might add, I was on the way to Starbucks while we were praying.
Starbucks became our go-to place. It was an amazing journey that for every interview we did, for every background check, trying to locate somebody, and every door getting closed. I mean, those doors were shut in our face because there was nothing that said, here it is, we've been waiting for you for how many years it's been. And it was like nothing there. Just our journey into Philadelphia at the Free Library to believe that we're going to find this article based upon somebody's statement, this girlfriend, that says, I remember him always showing this article from a lockbox. And we're like, where does that article come from? Did it come from the News Journal in Wilmington? Did it come from Philadelphia? No, I think it was a Philadelphia Inquirer article. So that's what you have to go on. Me and Terry are going up to look for this librarian's assistant to say, what are you looking for? We're not sure of the month. We're guessing on the year. We're guessing on the newspaper. And we don't even have a name to give you.
So you're looking for an article that says that, probably not going to say a black man, but that a person had been shot and in the head on a certain day, and that there's no answers to why he was shot. You're looking for that article.
That article in microfiche. Saying it right? It was computers, it was...
Because we forgot to mention that it was nearly 20 years later that you're looking into
1989.
this case. Yeah.
So we spent probably, I don't know, a good couple hours. No luck. So we leave the library thinking, is this it? And again, Terry and I praying and then knowing that we probably have nothing left to do, but somehow there was this unexplained Terry's no. And then if Terry said, I think it's over, then I felt like, no, it's not. So we were going back and forth. We weren't always on the same page.
That's a good segue. So, should I get in the Craig Peterson interview?
Yeah, that's it.
So the fact that we were on the same page, we were normally, 99% of the time, Scott and I were in agreement. I'm going to tell myself a little bit here, Mr. Instructor. So we go up to Vermont. Our last ditch effort is go talk to the alleged accomplice, Craig Peterson.
It was moved from Wilmington to Vermont.
So to make the long story a little shorter, we finally find him, and he's on top of a very tall hill. It's not a mountain. It's very cold. It's in December of 04, I guess. Is it December of 04?
Yeah.
And so we approach him cold, no pun intended. And Scott and I get out of the car. We're talking the whole way up from Wilmington up to Vermont. And we get out, we park, and he's uphill, icy uphill dirt driveway. Get out of the car, and these floodlights come on. And we're completely illumined, completely exposed. And I said something to Scott, something like, I was kind of embarrassed. I'm thinking, if he had a 22, he could have done us right here. We had nothing. So we, I felt a little embarrassed. We're kind of
because this person, at least at one point, was a skinhead.
Yes, allegedly.
And you're just walking right up
Yes.
to his house
Unannounced.
And tell us what time it was.
It was late. It was, I don't know, 11, 12 minutes maybe. So
yeah, we had traveled all, from Wilmington, and we did not take a break.
And part of it, I think, too, but I was thinking part of the rationale was small town of Vermont, 2 federal agents check into a motel, whatever. Like, it might be everybody's going to know that the feds are here, something's going on, and we just want to give anybody a heads up. So we go in there, and you can do it more justice, but we basically cold call Craig. He's very nice and gracious, completely opposite of what I expected. And we hit him initially with, hey, we want to talk to you more tomorrow at the Vermont State Police Barracks, but we're here about a rumor of a homicide. Now, I'm watching his nonverbals and his verbals.
And again, these are 2 interview and interrogation instructors. But go ahead.
Which you won't think that'll be after I tell you the story. So we do the initial, we just want to basically do a touch and try to convince him to come talk to us. Remember, we have no search warrants, we have no arrest warrants, no subpoenas, nothing. We're completely naked. And we're thinking 50-50, he might not show up. I mean, he might say, I'm not talking to you guys, forget it. But he basically didn't know anything about the rumor. He kind of denied everything. but said, yeah, I'll meet you guys tomorrow at the Vermont State Police Barracks. His fiancée was way more upset than he was. He was one cool cucumber. I mean, he was cool. Again, talking about a cold case homicide, 2 cats that approach him out of the blue, and he's nonplussed. So he does show up to the Vermont State Police Barracks early. He's ready to go. Now, he's a working man. He's an electrician. He works hourly. I told Scott, I said, he's going to lose some money on this. I'm not sure he's going to make it. He came down and basically, and I went to Scott to go into more detail, but when we're talking to him in the barracks, of course, he denies it. He does display his spiderweb tattoo.
That's a clue.
Right? Big clue. But his rationale was, it was something, we were knuckleheads back in the day. We got the tattoos. We didn't kill nobody, man. It wasn't about that. We were just trying to, be tough guys kind of thing. And this is our last stop. If he doesn't cooperate, we have nothing. So the part I want to tell myself about on the way back, of course, Scott and I are talking. And I told Scott, I said, Scott, I think I would know if he was lying. I'm serious. I think I would know. I don't think he's lying. I'm not sure he did this. I don't think he did this. Maybe Tom did. I'm not seeing it. I am not seeing it. Scott goes, I think maybe. I think he might be good for it. I'm like, man. And so we're thinking on the way back, we're like, what do we do from here?
Because he's denied it.
He's denied it, and we have nothing otherwise to compel him to speak. And that was our story on the way back. I was deflated on the way back to Wilmington. I'm like, oh, man, we got nothing. Now, I will say, let me just add this part, and I know Scott remembers this very well. We talked about the spiritual part about how this case started, but a lot of what Scott and I talked about after that was this whole sense of we're spinning our wheels. Like, we cannot get traction for nothing, but we have this compulsion to keep going. It's this catch-22, like, well, where are we going to go now? And remember, Scott and I talking about there is evil in the world. It does have a personality. And I told Scott, I said, what's happening here is classic. The demonic is resisting what we're trying to do. I said, now, I can't explain it. I can only just say what the Lord told me, that this was very important to him. I don't know why this case is so important to all the spiritual world, but it is. And we're pushing up against a wall here that I don't understand why it's taking so long. I said, but if we keep pushing, I think we're going to have success. But it took us a while.
All right. And again, all you know is that there's an allegation that a man has been shot and killed for no reason other than the color of his skin. And
Right.
that was unacceptable for both of you.
Yeah. And even though that happens everywhere, I mean, this is not just the only crime of a racially motivated hate killing of someone just because of the color of their skin. That got us, absolutely.
I think it gets all of
this
us.
one that was just, we can't stop. That's what I kept hearing. We can't stop. Don't stop. I would wake up at nights and hear, don't stop. Okay. What else? I mean, what else can we do? Craig got to me. When we sat with him, I just looked at him and said, Terry and I are going to tell you a story. It's a story. Just want to see what you think about it. And so imagine yourself, and that's what I did in this. You're sitting down, if somebody comes up to you and you know you didn't do something and said, hey, I heard a story about you. You and a guy by the name of Tom. Do you know Tom? Yeah, I know Tom. Well, you traveled to Philadelphia looking for a black man. Uh-huh. There was no change in his demeanor. And then you shot this black man. Shot him between the eyes. No change in demeanor. I'd be up in this guy's face saying, what are you talking about? There's just nothing. Not like, that story. Oh, gosh, that was such a BS story. I remember, okay, guys, you wasted your time. I was expecting something. But no, like, he was looking for that, are you going to arrest me? And I think that's what caught it for me. But otherwise, like Terry said, it was so cool. He was not sweating. He was not shaking like we typically see. But it was absolutely his non-verbal that I think got it for me.
Rich
So
has
at
a
that
question.
point, just had you narrowed it down to Philadelphia? Because when you first started this, you had no idea where. So when you said Philadelphia to him,
We heard was, but we didn't know. That was part of the rumor.
So the rumor was always Philadelphia.
Yes, but
Yeah.
also some other witnesses said they didn't know.
Yeah.
So
There
it
was a
kind
lot of
mixed.
unknown, but then Philadelphia also
Yeah.
was, and that's why when I think also Tricia was talking about the Philadelphia Inquirer, that it was a Philadelphia base. Like there was enough for us to say of all the cities, Wilmington, Camden, going over over into Cecil County, Maryland, we felt enough that we're focusing in Philadelphia, but we didn't have anything definitively saying.
But on top of that, we both knew they're local Wilmington kids. So we're thinking, well, I mean, the psychology of a killer, normally geographic profiling, which I'm not one, but worked with one back in the day, they don't want to go too far. They don't feel comfortable too far. They need to stay close. These are two young guys. So how comfortable are they going into a city they don't know? You're thinking, well, probably Wilmington, really, because they kind of know the city. But we didn't know. But I was thinking, well, maybe it's a good chance it's still Wilmington.
All right, so goose eggs. You go, you interview him, he denies it, you're heading back, but you're still thinking you're going to keep going with his investigation. So what's the next step? What are you going to do?
So first, Terry and I had a good dinner. That's a lot to be deflated. So we had a good dinner.
On TV, he would have confessed,
On TV, it would have been done, and then a commercial break. So we had a long drive back, and we were somewhat dejected, but we were still talking, praying, learning. I mean, it was a long. As Terry and I, instantly, I felt like have a connection, friendship, whatnot. There still is. I think it was 10 hours. It was a long drive. That's potentially the longest drive of my career with somebody I just got to know a couple of months earlier. And I'd be like, wow, what if we don't hit it off? What? This is going to be a long drive. It's not a plane flight. This is going to be a long drive. And I would say there might have been 5 minutes of silence because we just had so much back and forth. But ultimately it came down to, okay, we didn't get, I want a lawyer. That's a good thing. It was, we'll stay in touch. And so that's on our trip back. We started to strategize. Hey, what got him 10 years earlier that put Tom in jail? What grabbed him? What shook him? Because you're reading reports and now we're trying to figure out what haven't we done to motivate him to get him to talk before he shuts down. And that's when we decided, let's do a federal grand jury subpoena.
That wasn't until a year later. So between us talking to him the first time and the second time, when Scott got the subpoena, it was over a year, and he called us out of the blue. I was shocked. Once again, I was shocked. Like, dude is calling us. Like, he said, hey, I'm coming down to visit my mom. Do you guys still want to talk? I said, yeah, we'll want to talk. So I called Scott immediately. I said, hey, I wonder if he wants to give us something more. I said, why would this dude talk to his least favorite FBI and ATF agents about something he didn't do, right?
Yeah, what's to talk about?
Yeah, what's to talk about, So Scott, you said, I think we need to get a subpoena. Of course, he has connections, obviously, in Wilmington. I was out of my circle of influence. And that was when things really changed.
Okay, so he comes to visit his mother, and he also comes to visit you two. What happens? Do you talk first and then hit him with the subpoena? Or
We did initially.
Yeah.
No, but Scott had a great idea. I don't want to give it away, but
Go ahead.
part of the reason why he went to jail, Craig did the first time, was as a result of a grand jury investigation. He had lied on the grand jury and did jail time with the whole thing with him and Tommy. And so, getting a subpoena.
why don't you explain that? Tom Guidenson had some weapons, right? And he asked Craig to store them for him.
Yes, store them, but also I think Craig had lied for him about. Craig was a witness for Tom about the federal gun charge. He had testified, I think, falsely at the grand jury, trying to get him, not charged. They charged him with lying, and he went to jail for that.
Just for lying about Tom Guidenson. And now here you are again asking him questions about Tom Guidenson. And he's lied to you. And now you're going to hit him with a grand jury subpoena, and he's going to say to himself, Oh no, not again.
And we didn't know if he learned either because, when you go before a grand jury, and I've been on the other side of the grand jury where I'm like just a guy sending in the witnesses. And most people know you can ask for a lawyer, that will delay it. You can plead the fifth, say nothing. If it's self-incriminating, nobody can force you. But if you testify against someone else, they can force you. You can't hold that back. And so when we realized he made a decision to lie, and then the U.S. Attorney's Office actually prosecuted that, and they were successful in that, that really put him on his back heels. And that's when I think, as we both realized, that was the turn in that case. And then Tom goes off to jail, and Craig goes off to Vermont. He's getting out. When we served him, that's when we saw him shake.
Complete 180-degree change. He started sweating. I thought maybe he honestly was under influence of some kind of a drug or whatever. Complete demeanor change. He started trembling. I'm watching again the whole thing, and I was like, I'm looking at him, and he made a comment. He said, well, if this did happen, no one ever says, if this happened, if it didn't happen, right? And that's called an admission. He made the admission, I'm going, oh my goodness.
I said, see, Terry?
I just looked at Scott, I said, this happened. Now I'm thinking the normal cases, all right, about a year later, he'll get an attorney, and we'll finally get, it would be a long, drawn-out process. No, that didn't happen. This was, I think, at least Scott, you probably agree, was the breakthrough in the case. I literally felt like an invisible hand forced him down in his chair. He physically got smaller. Like he started shrinking and just losing his composure. And, take it from there. But so that was the first meeting. We get served a subpoena. I remember, so I think Scott and I, we excused ourselves from him. I don't know if you remember this, but I said, Scott, let's talk outside for a second. So we talked about the decision. I felt like this is such a big deal. And you would never do this in normal law enforcement. Never. But I said, Scott, I think we need to give him a break. Let him think about this. Go home and think about it.
Wow. Yeah.
And incredibly, Scott, we both felt compelled, like, give him the chance to walk out of here and think about this. You would never do that.
No.
Never.
Yeah.
I mean, that's completely counterintuitive. You
want them to sweat. You
Yes.
want to get them to that level where they break.
You never want to let them out of the chair if they're on the road to, confession. But we really felt strongly about that, and we told him that. And I think it made a big impression on him. I think he felt like these guys really care about him, and which we did, and we told him that. So he went away, went home to his mom's, and sure enough, called and came back. It was on a Monday morning, or Monday afternoon.
Yeah. It was late afternoon, and for those, how many federal employees in the room?
Raise them high.
Okay.
Or former.
We understand federal Fridays, stuff like that. Even though it was a Monday, it was closing in on 5 o'clock. So even though agents and law enforcement agencies are going to be open, people are going to be, doing different things. U.S. Attorney's Office? Any would say here? Now, even though there will be hard-charging prosecutors staying in the night, typically after 5, nobody's taking a call. But Rich Andrews, who was probably by then our 3rd prosecutor, who is now a sitting district judge in the District of Delaware. So let me just say something quick about Rich. I've worked with Rich from day one of my career. Rich is the most methodical legal mind of the U.S. attorneys that I knew. And there was nothing that was quick. For example, if I said, Rich, I have a question. Give me a yes or no. Okay, Scott, let's see. I mean, yes or no. It was long, drawn-out answers referring to some statute or something. So when I said, Terry, we got Rich assigned to this case, And we got to act quick because Craig said, I'll tell you what happened if I get immunity.
No one ever asks for immunity unless they know the seriousness, unless they have experience in the system. I've never heard a non-attorney ask for immunity, ever.
And so that was shocking. I think Terry and I were like, we're trained, we should know the next question to ask, but it was, first and foremost, who's going to give them immunity when we don't even know what happened? And who's going to get, where did this crime happen? Do we have the right person involved? And then, of course, knowing Rich Andrews is a phone call away, because I reached out to him. I said, don't leave yet. This may go past 5 o'clock. And he goes, nobody ever does this. Scott, I'm going to give you my cell phone. What? You're going to lose it afterwards, but I'm going to give you my cell phone. And so I think after the initial shock, Terry and I are looking at him, not knowing if this guy sees our faces like, these guys really don't have anything. Why am I even going to talk? This is a Hail Mary.
We were shooting blanks. We had nothing.
So we say to Craig, we can't call the prosecutor until you tell us something. And after a little bit of head bobbing, crying, etc., he goes, okay, here it is. And the story is, they are right. Tom and I planned to go shoot a black man in the streets of Wilmington. And the reason is because we want to be skinheads. We want to be accepted into this organization. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Craig. Craig's father is Jamaican. His mother is Romanian. To me, he was a white man. He was bald. And he said, Tom never allowed me to grow my hair in because then my heritage would come out. Wow. And that was what Tom held over him throughout high school. If they really realize that you're black, you're dead. Imagine, as a teenager.
Tommy actually had a photo of him with his hair out.
I did not know that.
And kept the photo to show Craig, just remind him. Wow. So
Talk about racial intimidation.
And also the whole psychology of Craig taking part in this crime, and he's got a mixed heritage, and the whole thing is like, wow. Yeah. So I'm sitting out, and I'm from Baltimore, so I dealt with the attorneys there. I don't know Rich Andrews at all, and we're talking to Craig, and we're just kind of answering questions. Well, unbeknownst to me, Rich is behind the wall listening to our conversation, waiting. We bring him in, and I'm shocked. You got an AUSA here after hours? Honestly, I'm like, wow. So he comes in, and this is how I remember it. I'm told it didn't happen this way, but this is what I remember. He asked Craig a few questions to make sure that he wasn't the shooter. He pulled out a ballpoint pen, blue in color, grabbed a napkin on the conference table, and wrote out, I was completely speechless, wrote out an immunity agreement on the napkin. Wow. That's what I remember happening. Now, apparently others remember it differently, but I remember thinking, how do we keep a lunch napkin for evidence? What do we store? How do we present that to a judge if this ever goes to trial?
What do you remember, Scott?
That's a nice tidbit. However, knowing Rich Andrews is going to be, Scott, I'm not writing anything on a napkin. I think we offered him a napkin, but because of the crunch time, but he ended up writing it. And just for any AUSA, especially Rich Andrews, to handwrite an immunity as opposed to typical immunity is going to be typed, is going to be retyped.
But more than he would have been appointed an attorney.
He would have been
right away.
An attorney.
And not even a question. We're going to get you an attorney. 3 months later, we might get back to this. Basically.
So he wrote it out on a piece of paper and slid it right to Craig, and he goes, this immunizes you for any federal charges here in Delaware. You're saying it's going to Philadelphia. This is not going to cover you in Philadelphia. I'm like, Rich, you don't need to say that. This is the lawyer in you. And Craig is like, I'm telling him.
All right, so what did he tell you?
So he said him and Tom set out in his mom's Chevrolet Beretta and had a .38 Colt.
Tommy had a .38 revolver, which Craig described in great detail. I remember going over it in
Yeah.
great detail. And yeah, basically that they had gone in Craig's mom's car to find a black man, to kill a black man
In the streets of Wilmington.
in the streets of Wilmington to get their spiderweb tattoo. And they
Before the prom.
did not find anyone. Well, they didn't find a suitable situation in Wilmington.
Because it was busy. And it was still light out. And so they said, we're not going to be able to do this and get away with it. Somebody's going to identify us or whatnot. So they jumped on the highway and heads north into Pennsylvania. And then Craig says, we drove a little bit, got off the highway, and he said, I remember distinctly there was a very large wall, and then he's describing landmarks. And you could just watch in his face as he's drawing from this day that's never let go of him. And he says, there were these glass pyramids. I remember glass pyramids. And we're writing things down. And then he goes, we stopped off side street and switched plates. So we stole the Pennsylvania license plate, put it on the back of the car, and then drove around. And he kept saying, I remember this wall, this big wall, and there we come across to an intersection. And so Craig is the driver, Tom is the passenger with the gun. And he said, that guy. And he says, I see a guy, I think he was wearing a trench coat. And I think he had a toothpick in his mouth. Just watching him for the first time actually verbalize what he had done. And then he comes down off his stoop, as he said, and he's approaching. And we know he probably thinks we're a bunch of drug users. He's going to sell us drugs. And then as the guy comes to the passenger side of the car, Craig said, Tom just extends his arm. Pow! One shot. And to watch, even to this day, to watch Craig stop and to say, I heard a thud. For somebody who had never done this before to say, I think he died before he hit the ground. That was just so foretelling.
Wow. So now you have what you need.
Yes.
Except for, you don't know who this man is. So
Still don't have a name.
Right, so why don't we move forward to your contact with the Philadelphia Police Department trying to figure out who the victim is, because you can't charge anybody with murder unless you have a victim. So tell us about that.
Leonard Lubashevsky is his name, but everybody knows him as Luby, a 35-plus year detective, ended up retiring with 40. So I called Luby with my contacts in Philadelphia. Oh, Luby's going to help you. And said, Luby, Terry and I have this, what we believe to be a homicide, unsolved homicide. Well, hoping it's unsolved homicide. Maybe somebody else is in jail who shouldn't be in jail. These are all the things that can run the gamut. And Luby goes, well, give me a year. We said, we think it's 1989 because these tattoos are fresh on the day of the prom, May of 1989. But it could be winter of 1988. We're just not sure. But let's start with May. Let's go to April. Then he goes, okay, give me a location. A tall wall in Philadelphia with glass pyramids. What? Is it West Philly, North Philly, North? I don't know. And he goes, well, we run our checks depending on the precinct, depending on the area, district. So we're like, Luby, let's go with 1989. Great, Scott. 1989 was the year we've had the most homicides, 500. You picked a good year. And so we started with gunshot wound versus anything else, get rid of it. A revolver, if he can still, because he's going through files and files for us and providing us information. And then we're like, but what do you know, where to be a big wall? And he goes, Girard College. Yeah, but that wall's still standing today. And then glass pyramids. Sometimes SEPTA has these glass pyramid huts. Could he be mistaking that for a building? Don't know. So we concentrated on Girard College. One unsolved murder. One sheet I see coming through the facts. And because it's just a very short paragraph. Black male, trench coat,
Single gunshot to the head.
Single gunshot to the head. Coroner writes, dead immediately. We're like, that's exactly what Craig was describing to us, of such a hard thud that this person had died before they hit the ground.
Let's say the name of the victim.
Aaron Woods.
Aaron Woods. Now you have a name. It's real. It's a person.
So, Scott and Luby, obviously Luby knows Philly. I don't know Philly too well, but the three of us, at different points, get in the car with Craig. He agrees to take a tour and see if he can possibly, which was a huge risk. We took a risk. Maybe he can identify where we have to try to narrow this down as best we could. We know if we go to court, he's going to have to be as particular as he can and try to find, if he can, where this happened. And of course, it happened at night. It was 17 years earlier then. And nothing ever came of it. He couldn't really tell where it happened. It was dark and that wasn't really helpful. But I was really excited. Like, this is a huge breakthrough. Obviously, this is our star witness now. Now we hand basically this baby off to Philly homicide.
And if you could explain why the decision was made not to go federal, because we do have some civil rights and intimidation charges that you could have just charged him with, but you wanted to charge him with the murder.
I think it's, for me, if I recall, it was kind of almost a de facto, the best thing to do. Just the right thing to do for a Philadelphia police homicide unit in the DA's office, that justice would be served by a local agency, I guess is what I'm trying to think, versus going federal. And in fact, I had no contacts, Philly ATF really, or Philly AUSA's office. So I guess a part of it was we had a known quantity in Luby. We felt like we had some trust level there, and he kind of squired the thing through the justice system there. So I don't know unless you think otherwise.
No, that's exactly right. I think also because Luby said, we want it. We're willing to go down this road. And prosecutors on the federal side are like, okay, we got you to a point, but it'd be difficult to, with the things that we're going to require, we're okay with Philly taking the lead. And if things were to go south, they come back to us. I think that's why we stayed on the local track.
So he's charged with 4 crimes. Obviously, I don't know what they called it. It was basically first-degree homicide. It was a version of that. I forget how they put it, but capital murder, conspiracy to commit homicide, a weapons charge, and ethnic intimidation, like their version of a hate crime.
Craig is your star witness.
Yes. So we get in. Luby calls and say, "Hey, we have." We went to grand jury, of course, and they issue an arrest warrant. Philly DA's office issues an arrest warrant for Tom Givison. Tom's living in Wilmington. We know where he's at. And Scott and I and other agents execute the arrest warrant for Tom early one morning. Philly homicide was there too. They actually got him to Philly right away. And then we start the whole prep for trial, basically. And I remember I was telling Scott, I was thinking, I was kind of biting my nails because I'm thinking, we're not controlling. I don't even know if it's going to get charged. If we go to trial, they might drop it. There's just no way to know. And we had all that stuff to go through. I kept thinking in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, Lord, you brought us here. Just see it through. Just see it through.
There is a trial. I take it that you both attended every day of the trial?
Yes, and both of us testified.
Okay, and Craig testified?
He did.
How about people from the prom? Were there anybody who testified?
2 former girlfriends testified.
Okay.
They were really probably star witnesses other than Craig.
Okay, how about Aaron Woods' family members? Did any of them testify?
Actually, I saw a couple of them outside the courtroom. I don't believe they testified. I don't believe they did.
Okay.
I can't remember.
After the trial, the verdict was
split. So they believed wholeheartedly in Craig and the witnesses. They absolutely believed they set out to kill someone. They set out to kill a black man. They just don't know if Aaron Woods was that victim, because there was no physical evidence. Craig obviously could not take us in that journey to that area where Aaron was killed. So they split the verdict. He was not found guilty of murder. He was found guilty of conspiring to commit murder, which is shocking to me. And then, of course, the ethnic intimidation The weapons charge, yes, but then I think that got pulled back because we were never able to find the gun, so thereby they said there wasn't enough. So the gun...
Well, so you're technically right. I found out through another rabbit trail that we had Tom Guy's guns in storage from his previous case 10 or 15 years earlier. I made a phone call, and sure enough, he had a .30 caliber revolver in our storage area in Wilmington that belonged to him. We got it tested, and they couldn't make a ballistics match with the round to the gun. So circumstantially, it was good, but we couldn't really, it wasn't a win in court. We couldn't present it as the murder weapon. The round was too deformed.
So how did you both feel about this split verdict?
I'll tell you, Jerry, I felt just getting to a name and getting to a grand jury and getting the family to hear that their son, brother, uncle had not died as what was told in the newspaper, a drug deal gone bad. That's what it was told. And so I felt like we've done everything in our power. Okay, Lord, we're here, but it's out of our hands. So I felt like whatever would happen, we would accept. Imagine a guilty on a conspiring to commit murder, thereby we believe that a murder took place, but we're not going to say a murder took place because we didn't find him guilty of that, which is amazing. And and so I felt like, okay, the jury believed, and so thereby they had to seek justice in some way, and conspiring to commit murder ultimately had 25 years attached to it.
I guess for me, I agree with everything Scott said, except I think I mentioned to you on the phone, I had an encounter with the Woods family in the back of the courtroom during the trial. We hadn't had a verdict yet. And they came up and thanked us for what we did. And that to me made it all. I felt like no matter what happens with the verdict, that they were so elated that they knew the truth. And that made it all. That kind of broke me right there. So the verdict was not exactly what we wanted, but I guess I was fine with it in the sense of at least the family knows, and that we do have a conviction of some kind.
Wow. So now you know why I chose this particular case review of all the case reviews that I've done to bring to you live today. So I want to thank you, Terry, and thank you, Scott, for coming and agreeing to come and to tell the story. Again, this is episode 179 of my podcast, FBI Retired Case File Review. I felt so strongly about this case that when I got a call from Jake Halpern, who is the host of a nationally known podcast called Deep Cover, he asked me for a suggestion, did I have a case for his fourth season? I gave him this one. Coincidentally, synchronicity, it's so weird that his 6-part series with these two agents launched last Monday on April the 22nd. And so if you want to hear from the family and from Luby, the Philadelphia detective, and these two, I think we've gotten some information here that wasn't even on the 6-part series. But if you want to hear more about this case, please listen to the podcast, Deep Cover. The name of this season is The Nameless Man. Thank you again. All right. I now want to introduce my guest for the Ask Us Anything panel. The first person I'm going to call forward is Darin Werkmeister. Darin was on episode 294, Tender Heart's Adoption Scam, something that was very, very personal for me since my 3 children were adopted as babies. Initially, Darin was on a white-collar crime squad, my squad, working fraud cases, and then was on a criminal intelligence squad working organized crime with the focus on Russian organized crime, international money laundering, and labor racketeering matters. He was also a member of the Philadelphia FBI SWAT team. Later in his career, he transferred to domestic terrorism and was the Philadelphia International Airport Liaison Coordinator. Following his retirement, he worked on corporate security for Vanguard. Darin is a brand new author of his new horror novel, Volk.
Thank
So
you.
pick that up wherever you can. And I was his training agent. I think I did a good job. The next person up, Rich Macko. Rich was on episode 161, Broad Street Shootout. Rich took a bullet for the Bureau. Rich Macko served in the FBI for 34 years, 3 as a support employee and 31 as an agent. He conducted long-term criminal gang and organized crime investigations in Philadelphia and worked matters involving international narcotics, outlaw motorcycle gangs, and organized crime. He's been deployed to Iraq and was awarded the Director's Award for Investigative Excellence by FBI Director Mueller for his efforts in the South Boston organized crime boss James Whitey Bulger case. Welcome. The next person is J.J. Klaver. Most of you may know that name because after I retired from the FBI, J.J. followed me as the FBI spokesperson here in Philadelphia, so you've seen his face on TV. J.J. served in the FBI for 25 years. He was initially assigned to Indianapolis Division for 8 before being transferred to Philadelphia. He was on the Technical Operations Squad. You know how you hear about wires and all of that? Well, that's what JJ did and became the supervisor for that squad. He works for Thomas Jefferson University Health System now, and he has a doctorate degree in organization and management. And he started his own consulting firm, Klaver Consulting Associates. And the next person up is Steve Heaney. Steve was episode 128, Philadelphia Tow Truck Ambush, which is a fascinating case review. Steve served in the FBI for more than 25 years. His entire career was spent in the Philadelphia division, working primarily major thefts and violent crime. He was a firearms instructor and was also a SWAT team leader. And for 10 years, he was the FBI liaison for the Federal Detention Center in Philadelphia. And he was later appointed the Violent Crime Squad Supervisor and Healthcare Fraud Squad Supervisor, and the SWAT team coordinator for a while. Next person up is Bill Grace. Bill was on 2 episodes. Episode 99, Wolf Ticket on the Roofers Union Local 30 labor racketeering case, and episode 27, Mayor Slayer Municipal Corruption. I have to tell you why we call Bill the Mayor Slayer. He was the case agent for the case against Mayor Milton Milan in Camden, and also the case of Mayor Jerry Luongo, who was my mayor in Washington Township, New Jersey. Bill served for 33 years with the FBI, conducting high-profile corruption investigations. The next person up is Kathryn Lambert. Episode 10, Counterterrorism, the JTTF, and Jihad Jane. Remember Jihad Jane? Well, that's Kathy. Kathy was involved in that case as a supervisor of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Kathy served for 20 years in the FBI. Prior to joining, she earned a PhD in political science with a concentration in counterterrorism. She's the real deal. She went on TDY's assignments around the world, working together with local, state, and federal law enforcement partners to combat the threat of terrorism throughout the United States. The next person up is Jeff Covington. Jeff served in the FBI for 22 years. During his bureau career, he was assigned to a violent crime squad. He was involved in 2 shootouts while in Kansas City Division. Later in his career, he participated in tracking down not 1, but 2 FBI top 10 most wanted fugitives. All right, here's your Ask Us Anything. Panel, everyone. And we have our microphones here. Questions?
Hey, Jerry.
Nice to see you.
For those of you who specialized in interrogation, I know the Reed method has sort of lost some of its luster. How much of the peace method of interrogation taken over in law enforcement?
I am not familiar with the peace method. I am familiar with the Reed technique. I went through that training as well.
Terry, could you explain to everyone what the Reed technique is?
I went through it a long time ago, but basically it's a very strict, disciplined way of questioning people, whether it's witnesses or defendants or suspects. That what I remember, it's kind of like, if you say this, we say this. It's a very disciplined, strict way to question or even interrogate people that you're talking to. The method that I was trained in and taught is much more situational and far more flexible than that, and really depends on the person's verbal and nonverbal as they're presenting to you for the follow-up questions. But I can't answer to this part. I'm not familiar with that style.
Scott, do you know anything about it?
No, I'm actually interested in hearing what the peace method is, and like so, going through the basic and the advanced training for Reed, and then the FBI in 2011, I was part of the pilot program where they, in law enforcement, I kind of say we all beg, borrow, and steal from each other. Whatever works, pass on. Let somebody else help. So, the FBI ultimately uses rapport building. So the Reed is break down the barriers, the wall, and then let the good rise. And so the FBI uses that, but let's not break anything down. Let's just continue to befriend them wherever they are at whatever part in their life, and then build upon that. So it's a relationship building, which I think we used ultimately for CREP.
Hello, everybody. I just have a quick question. Seeing that there's probably 30 plus years on the stage there, how has your experience in just overall changed from being an FBI agent? How has your perspective of life just changed, and how do you view it, and how do you guys disconnect from FBI to just being your individual selves?
Bill?
My wife tells me it never leaves. I always have a slanted eye towards things. So after 30 years, you have something ingrained. Take a little bit of time to not look for the bad in everything or an alternative reason to why someone's doing something. I think I'm working on it. So. But it's something that's ingrained. It's get nostalgic. It's a great job, great people, and it really never leaves you. Be a little bit skeptical sometimes.
I wanted to expand that for Steve, because Steve worked violent crime and Jeff did too for most of his career. I'd like to hear your thoughts about how you've transitioned after retirement and what your thoughts are on the murder rate and the violence that is in Philadelphia today.
Well, first, the transition for me initially was the friendship and the camaraderie you have with everybody that you work with. And if you have an opportunity to work with people for 25 plus years, you just develop a real strong bond. And then one day, you're not an FBI agent anymore, and you're just a citizen. So initially, that was probably the hardest part for me. As far as working the job, you miss a little bit of that, but then you got to keep yourself busy doing other things to do in the world. One of my buddies I worked with for many years said, when you're doing this job, you have the front seat to the greatest show on earth. And it's true, because you see everything, and you see all the good, and you see all the bad in people. And as far as the violence is concerned in the city, I will say, full disclosure here, I don't come to the city as often as I used to. I used to come in here all the time with my wife, be friends, go out and about. I don't think the violence has changed that much. I think it's, to me, I guess from my window seat, has always been violent. Certainly in the last few years, post-COVID, or during COVID, we had a higher spike in the homicide rate. It seems to be going down a little bit, which is good. I hope things change. You got a new administration here. You got a new police department. I work with the Philadelphia Police Department on a daily basis for my whole career. They are the bread and butter and the bones of the city. And everything we did with them. And it worked well. And when you focus and do things, and if there are consequences, then things change. But overall, I enjoy retirement. I still work. I got 3 jobs. I'm always busy. I don't work Sundays, so I was able to make it today.
Well, the biggest thing for me is fighting cynicism. And I guess you guys, you feel the same way. You look at people being in law enforcement, them or us, and that's, I know Steve probably understands what I'm talking about. It's the crooks and the good guys. And every person's not bad. Every criminal is not the worst criminal in the world. And you got to process that. And then when you retire, you've got to somehow change your approach to people. I'm no longer a special agent. I'm a civilian. I've got to make that transition and realize that there's good and bad in the world. There's worse and there's better. And you can't take that cynicism out into the world because it'll hurt you. It'll hurt your relationships. It'll hurt your family and your friends. Well, I can't be a friend with him because he did so and so. Well, after you put this badge down, and perhaps before, you really do need to do some introspection. How has this job helped me? How has this job hurt me? Am I a better person for being an FBI agent? Look in that mirror and see who the heck that guy is that you put a suit and put a badge in your pocket every day. Has this job made you a better person? If it hasn't, you probably stayed on the job too damn long. You better be a better person for being an FBI agent. You're held to a higher standard, aren't we, guys? Whether you want to be held to that standard or not. And that's how I feel about it. I have to be a better person on the job, and perhaps even more now. I'm still that better person. So we all have to look in that mirror when they hand you those retirement creds and realize the show's over, but I still have to be the best person that I can possibly be.
Following 9/11, we worked a great deal with the military, with forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. So when I retired, I accepted a position with a university. It's not affiliated with the military, but 85% of our students at the undergraduate and graduate level and even the doctoral level are active duty military. So I teach full-time in the National Security Department. I help these officers and these enlisted young men and women who are protecting our country. I share my experiences with them and help them achieve their goals.
I think for me, becoming an FBI agent was a perfect fit. I'm not a particularly talkative guy to begin with, so being able to tell those people close to me, I can't talk about that, that's my job. So I've lost that excuse in retirement. As my wife will say, it's not always the greatest, which seems funny because then I became the media rep and spokesperson for the Philly division. All I did was talk about the FBI. But I think the danger you run into in law enforcement and being that way is internalizing the things that you're seeing and the things that you're doing. I worked a plane crash. I went to Ground Zero at 9/11. There were a lot of other things I was involved in, cases I was involved in, that maybe it would have been better had I talked about it more, but I didn't or couldn't. So I think that's a risk, and when you retire, some of that you still can't talk about or you shouldn't talk about, but there's a danger, I think, in law enforcement, and I think it's why there are high suicide rates among law enforcement officers, because you tend to internalize these things, and as Jeff said, there is that us versus them mentality. So you feel like you can't talk to the them about it. And when you retire, other than coming here today, you don't really have that connection to the us anymore because you're not around those people every day. I think that's a danger when you retire. Rich?
So Richard Macko, 34 years. I started when I was 22 as a clerk at headquarters. I was recruited by a college football teammate. He never got into the FBI because he had eyesight that was very poor and he didn't think he would get through. So came to Philadelphia first office and stayed my entire career, although it did take me to 26 states working. And I was in Iraq near the end of my career. I ended up volunteering for that. I worked with a judge to help him put together his case against the regime crime, 4 regime crimes against Saddam Hussein and the others. My case was the Marsh Arab case. They were exterminating the Arabs living in the area of the marshes where they couldn't get at them during the Iran-Iraq war. But it was a successful case. It went on after me. I retired at 57. That was mandatory for us. And then, to me, I felt like I was building on my career at that point. Because I had been in Iraq, I was hired to become a battlefield detective in Afghanistan. I was out at Fob Salerno, which is Coast Province. It's right on the border with Pakistan. We were identifying IED placers and or others who were making them. I spent a year and 3 months there with the 101st Airborne. If you're familiar with Band of Brothers and Easy Company, that was their history. And I went out on patrol with Easy Company 60 years later. And that also gave me the opportunity to work with the State Department to get back over to Afghanistan at the end of my career as an instructor for counterterrorism forces. And I finally retired in 2019. I had an injury over there. It was a rewarding career with the FBI, but I found it even more interesting afterwards.
Yeah, just to reiterate on some of the folks that said up here, it all hits home. You need to have connections outside of the FBI because one day you will leave, and you need that family, community, and everything out there because it is a big transition. And what Steve said is front row seat to the best show in the world, and it's true. I'll see things on the news, I'll see stories, and immediately feel that pang that, gee, I wish I was part of that. And then I sit back and put my feet up and crack a beer and say, you know what, it's not all bad. But it's a huge transition. It's a huge part of your life. When you're an FBI agent, that is what you are. For better or worse, that's your life. So when it comes to an end, it can be abrupt. So it's important to have those family, friends, community connections out there to find something else for you to spend your worthwhile time.
As a police officer, I did 6 years, and then the FBI, Old Wilmington, Delaware, 22 years. Loved every minute of it, and then to meet so many different people across so many different paths. But I also enjoyed my interviews with bad guys. I learned a lot with regards to having a plan. I knew as I met my wife in '98 and we got married, and so I met her after I'd become an FBI agent, and then have 4 children, that college is going to be expensive. So having good mentors in the FBI, they say, hey son, have a plan on your exit and don't stay if you don't need to, and get out there. So I started learning and planning, and at 50 I retired. That's one of the nice things in the federal government. You could retire. Went to Wilmington University on their staff full-time there, and right now, as of now, 3 of my 4 children, that beautiful, beautiful university is paying for tuition. It's nice.
Should I answer an FBI question even though I'm ATF?
ATF.
Okay, yeah.
How does it feel?
Okay, thank you. I feel very outnumbered right now. But very similar. It's very, very similar experiences. Very briefly, I was ready to retire at 55. We had moved to a southern city from Baltimore, and ATF would not move me to that city. So I moved my wife and youngest daughter there ahead of time. But I did become an instructor, so I'd commute from Glencoe, Georgia, up to where we lived every weekend. So I did that for 3 years. Pretty much, I was 6'5", and they wore me down to 5'9". So I was ready to go. I knew it was time when I was there 3 years, and I enjoyed being on the staff there a lot. My time was up. I wanted to spend time with my family and my wonderful, beautiful wife, Marjorie.
Sometimes people forget that I was an FBI agent too. I know in the Inquirer, in the article yesterday, they identified me as FBI spokesperson. I did work frauds and embezzlements and Ponzi schemes for most of my career. And as for the question about transitioning, I'm not sure if I really did. I did take that 7-year break where I worked for SEPTA, which people thought was a strange job for me to take. But I've always said that it was a perfect job for me because at SEPTA, they are mission focused, getting the trains and subways and buses and trolleys moving every day. So actually it was the perfect job for me where I learned more skills as far as media relations. And so when I retired for the purpose of being what they call today a content creator, creating content about the FBI. And I've been doing that for 8 years. And so I don't know if I've really transitioned. I don't know if that's a problem. My husband thinks it is. He keeps saying, I thought you retired. But no, I continue speaking with FBI agents, both active and retired, almost every day. So I haven't had that experience of being disconnected. So yeah, I'm still living the dream. I heard you. I heard you, Rich. And our next question?
The case that you put forward against Tom depended a lot upon the testimony of Craig. If he had been more accurate or better memory about what occurred, he might have had a conviction on murder. So what I'd like to ask is, there's a fellow who does some YouTube things or podcasts, Jimmy D. Gregorio. He was a player in the Pagans motorcycle gang case in Philadelphia in front of Judge Luongo, and Tom Lee was the assistant U.S. attorney who prosecuted the case. And in the middle of the case, he was the star witness for the prosecution, so he had an agreement. And in the middle of the case, they had to stop it to get immunity for him because he apparently hadn't told the prosecution that the Pagans transport convoys of meth from Delaware into the Philadelphia area from the cookhouse, and they'd have a car in front and a car behind the transport car. And on one of the transports, they had run into some Delaware State troopers, and Jimmy D had apparently killed one of the Delaware State troopers. So they stopped the trial and had to get immunity for Jimmy D. Gregorio. And what I wanted to ask is, since you all work with witnesses, if you also had situations where something's popped up unexpectedly, even though the people you're working with are supposed to give you the information, I guess, completely, fully, truthfully.
Well, I was the case agent on the Jimmy D case. And there was an issue. There was a murder down in Delaware. They tried to pin it on Jimmy, but we do know that he had nothing to do with it. So what you just said about stopping the trial, giving him immunity for a murder, that never happened. Okay. And I talk to Jimmy at least once a month. He's been on the History Channel. He did a lot of work after. He's done a lot of good work with law enforcement afterwards. Jimmy was a key witness in 2 of our trials. He also testified in a mob case, the murder of 1982, the underboss, I forget his name now. But he testified for our Pittsburgh office a couple of years later. I took him out for that one. And he also testified in Virginia for another RICO case that I helped them with down there. So that did not happen, what you just described.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and I love your show, by the way. Love your show. Thank you to all of you men and women who have served. And I hope I'm not too political. If I am, just go to the next person. Do any of you feel that James Comey got a raw deal getting fired by Trump? If anyone wants to take that.
I will answer that question for me in a non-political way, because as you all know, the reason the show is successful is because I don't discuss politics and I am nonpartisan. And I think that's the way the FBI is, and that's the way my show is. But I will say for Jim Comey, who I've had a chance to meet, I think most FBI agents agree that when he did the conference where he announced that a certain person, I'm not going to be political, so I'm not going to name their names, would not be charged. And it's not about whether or not that person was going to be charged or not going to be charged. That is not the issue. It is, as the FBI director, that was not his role. That was not his role. And by making that statement, he pulled the FBI into an unstable political climate that we have not been able to shake to this day. So, do I have agreement in that? Okay. Yeah, and we.
No, exactly. I agree. I think myself and either one of these 2 retired agents were talking outside before the event today, and we were agreeing that one of the things that the public doesn't understand, the wide chasm between the political leadership of agencies, including ATF and others, versus the working men and women that are on the ground working their cases. People would approach me as an ATF agent and say, hey, what about this, and this? whatever, might be some conspiracy they heard. And you can't necessarily answer for what they say or do at that political appointee level, but it's not necessarily agreed upon by the working men and women in the field and the people that are there year after year. So that's one thing I wish the public would understand, that political appointees, whether it's James Comey or anybody else, they sometimes do things that we don't agree with, and they do it for their reasons. But where we work, where we used to work, it's a whole different world.
JJ would like to have some work because, again, he was the spokesperson.
Well, as Jerry taught me, because she trained me to be the spokesperson for the FBI doesn't comment on investigations. It speaks through the judicial process. So it becomes public when someone is charged with a crime, because that is then in a public court. It is in a public venue. And the FBI, unlike, say, a local police department, a chief is appointed by the mayor or a town council. They are a little more accountable on a day-to-day basis to the public that they serve. And not that the FBI is not accountable, but the FBI mission requires that it be apolitical, that it be independent. And to come out and say that an investigation was conducted but no one was charged with a crime, that is almost unheard of in the FBI. And it goes against what supports the FBI mission, and it's counterproductive. So from a political standpoint, as Jerry said, it injects the FBI into something where it does not belong and should not belong.
Hi, Jerry. I have a question about the case that came up today, because in preparation, I did listen to the case. I did not get to the point of understanding anything about Craig as a person. And from the beginning of your talk, you went straight into the Lord and how the Lord placed it in your spirit that this was something that was going to be pivotal and that you needed to hang in there. Listening to you describe Craig, it brought me to tears to hear that there was such self-hatred of who he was that he would then join an outfit to go and commit crimes against individuals who, had his hair ever grown out, they would have killed him too. And all I could hear was, how could you hate yourself that much? Or hate the person who gave you that aspect of your character? Maybe he just really did not like his father, and this is how he acted it out. When you got that bit of information, how did that sit with you? And what additional conversations might you have had, or did you have with Craig when that particular aspect came out? Because he surrounded himself with people who basically hated him, and his friend, talk about having a frenemy. If you grow your hair out, I'll let everybody know that you're basically a black man in America. That just, how did you all deal with Craig releasing that aspect of his information to you?
Craig never told us about his heritage, and we never asked him. Someone asked me when I first saw him, did I have any indication that he was biracial or mixed or whatever? And I wasn't sure because I couldn't tell, but when I heard the information about he was potentially was biracial, part of the interviewing methodology is to hear the truth from them, their truth. You don't want your truth, you want their truth. Because if we only know our truth, we're not learning anything. We want to hear what the truth is to them. And that was always a focus. Craig, tell us about you. So he never went there, and so we never really wanted to push on that warm door. And had we pushed on that door, it might have been a whole different outcome, because we might have gone to a place he was ready to go to.
It is important that the person we're talking to sees no judgment, that we are on a playing field at the very level. And so there was no judgment to Craig. One person asked, do you think there was redemption? I did see a hardcore shake of his conscience, and he held it, he bottled it for so long that when it came free, he felt better. Yes, he got immunity because there was no other choice. It would be nothing. There would be no name. It would forever be nameless. I think the living in fear and whatnot, that he felt he was a part of it, and his life is going to be about undoing or making repair, repent, and so forth. And his confession is yet another piece of the puzzle and a piece of evidence to get presented to court.
Just follow up with something that was just mentioned. Just a little misconception maybe. You're in contact with defendants who do bad things. So years ago, a buddy of mine, we're working a case. We know one of the guys involved in this crew that's doing a whole bunch of robberies, multi-state robberies. We know he has a hearing downtown Philadelphia, and we know the time that it's supposed to be. So we take a shot. Let's see if we can catch him down there. Maybe we can see him going in or coming out. We can lock him up. We got a warrant for him. So we sit outside. We wait for a little while. We see him. He shows up. He meets with his lawyer. His lawyer tells him to stay outside because his lawyer's smart. He's thinking, if you go inside, you're probably going to get locked up. So his lawyer goes in to handle the case, the local case that he had. Nothing to do with what we were doing. So just drove down, come up on him. Hey, how you doing? Locked him up, to get ready to go into the car. He goes, you taking me to jail right now? I said, yeah, we are. He goes, these sneakers cost a lot of money. I don't want to go into jail with these sneakers. I said, okay, because that's my car over there. He goes, yeah, I got just a banged up pair of sneakers. I said, sure. Opened the trunk, took out his old pair of sneakers, got down on my knees, took the sneakers off him, put the sneakers in his car. Actually, we took custody of him to give him to his girlfriend later. Got down, put the sneakers on him, tied his shoes for him, got him in the car, searched him, and we drove to the courthouse. So we come down to 6th and Arch, if you're familiar with the federal courthouse is. We get to the light, we're ready to take a right-hand turn, and he goes, it's about to happen, isn't it? And I look in the rearview mirror and I said, what's about to happen? He goes, this is when you guys take me down into the basement and you beat the hell out of me, right? For a confession. So I stopped the car and I turned around and I looked at him and I said, I just got on my hands and knees and took off your nice sneakers and put on open and tied your shoes for you. I said, we're going to go into the building. You're going to sit down. We're going to reach your rights. You're going to get some water. You're going to make any phone call whoever you want. This one phone call thing, you can call anybody. I don't care. I'll let you call and make 10 calls. You want to make 10 calls. And you're going to be processed, and you're going to be taken to the courthouse, and you're going to see your lawyer. Nothing bad is going to happen to you. He flipped immediately when he got his lawyer, and we solved a whole bunch of robberies around the country that we didn't even know about. Just like he said, you don't pass judgment. No matter how bad you've done, we have a job to do. So.
Andrew Cunanan was the first openly gay top 10 fugitive that I helped investigate. The case was out of Chicago, but I had the case for a while here in Philadelphia. Man killed 5 people brutally. And of course, he killed Versace down at his home in, I think, Miami Beach, was it? I didn't feel any way about him. Didn't hate him, didn't know him. He was just, as Steve said, another FBI target or whatever we're dealing with. We learned that you can't feel that way about the people you're investigating because you lose your objectivity, you lose your professionalism. Killed 5 people, and one he killed brutally in Chicago. He stole the guy's Lexus, he stole some gold Cougarans. He murdered him and stayed overnight in his home with the guy's body in there. He didn't find it until after he left. So, to Steve's point, you do your job, the courts will decide what's to be done with him. That's for the Justice Department. You do your investigation, you gather the information, you do the best job you can in terms of a professional investigator. And then catch the guy, turn them over to the court system, and allow them to do the job they're supposed to do. If you're on the job and you find that you're hating somebody that committed a crime, a murder, bank robbery, then you probably need to find something else to do. That is not what you do as an FBI agent, ATF agent, or any kind of agent for the government. Do your job, build your case, and then pass it on to the courts. Let them do what they may.
One more anecdote. I went through training school in 1976 dealing with quantum. 2 things that I learned is number 1, never leave the federal employees' health benefit plan. Just to never get back in.
I believe that.
And number 2, one of our legal instructors, his words of wisdom were treat everybody as you would like to be treated. The golden rule. I worked a lot of white-collar crime cases, political corruption cases. So you're dealing with upper-class snitches. So I had this one case that we had this cooperating witness that was wearing a wire for us. And he was pretty good. So he didn't testify because everybody fled out. So I retired on a Friday. So that Monday, as every retiree does, they go to Home Depot because they're going to start their project. And my daughter had come home from school in Chicago, so she was with me. And I'm walking down the aisles, and I look down this one aisle, and there's the cooperating witness. You couldn't miss him because he's a former basketball player, about 6'6". So I slide on down 2 aisles down and work my way down to the end to find my daughter. And who do you run into? The cooperating witness. And my daughter's with me. So we chat back and forth, and he looks at her and he said, you know, if I ever had to be arrested by the FBI, I'm glad it was your father. So I don't know how to take that, but again, you deal with these people, you have relationships with them, you eat with them, whether it's at a hot dog stand or an IHOP. You recognize that they're individuals, you recognize that they traveled a different path, and quite honestly, they're serving a purpose for you. So you develop a friendship, you develop a relationship. So, I mean, we asked about leaving the FBI. Those are 1,001 stories like that. But that was my daughter was kind of struck by this whole thing. She remembers it, so.
Kathy, because of what is going on in the world today, globally, the turmoil, and we had the FBI director, Christopher Wray, just testify that the threat metrics is going up. And I thought we'd have Kathy here, who's an expert. So I wanted to ask her to talk about that.
Sure. I think it was in March of 2003, I was selected to go to Israel for interrogation training. And the focus, of course, was on Hamas at that time. And a lot of what my colleagues mentioned, a lot of the strategies of forming relationships with individuals who wish you harm are used by the Israelis as well. And it's all about, even in their situation, again, this was also at the time, I was there when Sheikh Yassin, who was the spiritual leader of Hamas, was killed by the Israelis. And so there was a lot of concern that there were going to be bombings and attacks against visitors to the country, specifically Americans. But the mindset of the Israeli government is very different from the American government. They literally had a wartime stance. We would be sitting in class and all of a sudden they would have to rush out. It was the first time that someone with Down syndrome was used as a suicide bomber at one of the gates. So I was there for 2 weeks, and the spiritual leader of Hamas is assassinated. Down syndrome individuals are used as suicide bombers. And so just the whole mentality is very different. I mean, we went through something similar following 9/11, but it was still very different than what we went through. And as I watched the coverage about Hamas, I worked Hamas my entire career. And again, to avoid politics, but Hamas is a designated foreign terrorist group in the United States. And as a political scientist, we have to appreciate that there's a difference between a nation who aspires towards statehood and a foreign terrorist group that engages in brutality. Those are two very, very different things. And we used to have to work and deal and interact with the Palestinian community on a daily basis. And even the people within that community understand that difference. And for some reason, that difference between a nation aspiring towards statehood and terrorism have somehow merged. And it's very unfortunate.
What about here in the United States? Do you believe there is going to probably be another attack somewhere in the United States, another 9/11?
The threat of homegrown extremism, we date that to 2009 with Jihad Jane, ironically. So that's always going to remain a threat. That isn't going anywhere. There will always be individuals who are inspired by a foreign ideology to use violence to achieve their goals. So that isn't going anywhere. Now, will there be a direct attack by a group like Hamas or Hezbollah? I would have to say no, but I was also an instructor for the FBI prior to 9/11, and I always thought of that poor FBI agent who was giving the standard line on his or her presentation on September 10, 2001, in which we always said there was no known threat against the United States. So I say it with that caveat.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Jerry, for doing this. Interested in hearing some of the myths and misconceptions that you've had to debunk or deal with during your time as an agent. I want to hear more about the myths and misconceptions that you've had to address or debunk as an agent.
Your question, Mark, would be an excellent one for us to ask everybody before we end. So we're going to go ahead and just quickly, everybody's got like a minute or two to talk about what you thought as an FBI agent was a myth or something that you believe you would like to set straight today. Go ahead, Bill.
A lot of the cases I worked either with the Camden County Prosecutor's Office, the IRS. We share. We had a good working relationship with every agency we worked with, and everybody brings a certain expertise to these cases. And we blend it well together, we got along together. I won't deny that there are situations, but I never stole a case. So I always had a lot. Every case I had, the Rufus case was 22 defendants. The Mayer case was a little bit smaller, but I had help in all those cases. There were 3 case agents on the Rufus case, John Tam and Mike Macy's, and it was a whole squad effort there. So, and I think most of the major cases involve TFO officers, so that we don't work well with others. That's a myth.
So I remember in Quantico training, they used to tell us the things that would get you in trouble when you came out into the field. One was BUCAR, the car that you get assigned, hopefully, when you get to your field office. Everybody gets a car when you get to field office eventually. And you get that car, you get to use that car all day long. Uncle Sam's gassing it for you. When you need new tires, you get new tires. When you need an oil change, you get an oil change. You get a radio, so people get to talk to you, you get to talk to them. But what you cannot do, and this might be a misconception, is you cannot use that car for personal reasons. That car is only for the job. You can't pick up the kids from daycare. You can't take it on vacation. All these things I'm saying have been done. Okay, not by me. Okay, I'm not on the job anymore, so I can say, yes, I did, but I didn't. I used to drive to the daycare and take my daughter out when it was late and sit in the parking lot with my daughter and then wait for my wife to come from an hour away to come pick her up, only when I was a mile from my house. But I knew I could not drive her in that car to my house because I would get caught. You get caught, no questions asked. You're suspended 30 days, no pay.
I'm just going to put a little twist on that issue. Because I worked for the JTTF, I dealt with mostly non-citizens, and so the beliefs about the capabilities of the FBI surpassed what Americans know to be true. And those are myths that we do not want to debunk because we exploit them to our advantage.
My thing is that there are minorities and women in the FBI. Let me see that again. There are minorities and women in the FBI. Real quick, I went to a woman's house after a bank robbery. I was dressed to the nines. She did not believe I was an FBI agent. She called the office. There's a well-dressed man at my door claiming to be an FBI agent. There are a lot of people in this country do not know that we have women and minorities, Hispanics, blacks, Muslims. We would hopefully represent the United States in terms of all ethnic groups dedicated to getting the job done. So folks, pass the word that women and minorities in the FBI.
Well, to follow up on what Steve said, my son is in the audience. He's never been in one of my bureau cars. Are you willing to swear that, Max? As a tech agent and then a supervisor of the tech squad, and I think it was a common myth from watching movies and TV, the FBI could tap into cameras all over the place, could redirect satellites. Maybe we didn't always want to dispel those myths, but we would have case agents come up to the tech squad and say, can't we get a satellite image of that? You work for the same FBI I do. Where did you hear about satellites in the FBI? So that was a bit of a myth, but perpetrated by movies, I think. But thanks for helping dispel all that, Jerry, with your podcast.
I just want to reinforce what Bill was saying, that we were stronger when we worked together with all the federal agencies. The Pagan case that was mentioned earlier, it was ATF and DEA and FBI, but we also had the assistance of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and New York State Police on those cases. Delaware County, Philadelphia, we had the local assistance too. So we were always stronger when we worked together.
Yeah, just to hit on what some of the other folks have said up here as well. Creating capabilities out there and letting people think that those capabilities exist. That is a really strong thing that we do, particularly with OC. We want them to think we know everything they're saying, everything that they're doing, everywhere they're going. So if they come away with that assumption, far be it from me to set them straight. And I'll let that ride.
Terry and I know ATF and FBI can work together.
All right, I want to thank everyone for coming today. On my website, you have the names of all the people that are speaking today. You have their episode numbers, so please listen to it. I'm trying to increase the reach of the podcast. I have over 10 million downloads in the 8 years I've been doing this, but please continue to spread the word about FBI Retired Case File Review. Thank you for coming. And that's the end of episode 317, the recording of FBI Retired Case File Review live. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find lots of photos from the live show, a link to episode 179, the original case review of this racially motivated murder investigation, and a link to Deep Cover, Season 4, The Nameless Man, the 6-part podcast series where you can take an even deeper dive into the case and hear from the Philadelphia detective who took the case to trial in state court, and from Aaron Wood's family. Also in the show notes are links to the case reviews of the retired agents who took part in the Ask Us Anything panel discussion, and to other Philadelphia-based FBI Retired Case File Review episodes. While in Philly, I also got the chance to tour the newly renovated FBI offices and to meet the new special agent in charge, SAC Wayne Jacobs. I was very impressed with both. In my May 2024 email to Reader Team members, I write about my visit to the Philadelphia Division Field Office and share lots of photos taken during my visit. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my Reader Team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my Reader Team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.